You may believe you are becoming less patient, less social, or less willing to participate in the life you once accepted without question. You may think something in you has hardened. The truth is more unsettling. What is disappearing is not your ability to care. What is disappearing is your willingness to keep performing a version of yourself that was built for survival rather than truth. You have spent years learning how to be understood. You learned which parts of yourself made other people comfortable. You learned when to soften your voice, when to hide your intensity, when to laugh at something that did not move you, and when to pretend that a shallow connection was enough. You became skilled at translating yourself into forms that others could easily receive. Now that translation is becoming unbearable. Carl Jung spent decades studying this rupture between the person you appear to be and the person your psyche is trying to become. He called the social identity you construct the persona. The persona is not false in the simple sense. It is necessary. It allows you to participate in the world. It gives you a role, a name, a function, and a recognizable face. But when you mistake that face for your whole being, the mask begins to suffocate the life beneath it. This is often what old souls notice before anyone else. You notice that familiar conversations leave you strangely tired. You notice that praise no longer satisfies you when it is directed at a version of you that no longer feels real. You notice how quickly people become uncomfortable when you stop offering the emotional performance they have come to expect from you. You notice the subtle punishment that follows when you become quieter, clearer, or less available. At first, you may interpret these changes as failure. You may worry that you are losing your warmth or withdrawing too far. You may try to force yourself back into old rhythms. You answer messages you do not want to answer. You attend gatherings where your body remains tense for hours. You repeat stories about yourself that once felt meaningful, but now sound like lines from a character you no longer know how to play. Yet the harder you try to restore the old self, the more exhausted you become. The persona is beginning to fall away. Jung understood that this often happens when the psyche can no longer develop through adaptation alone. Early in life, you survive by becoming what your environment rewards. You learn to be responsible, agreeable, impressive, useful, entertaining, strong, spiritual, selfless, or invisible. The exact role differs, but the mechanism is the same. You build an identity around the conditions under which you were accepted. That identity becomes your passport into relationships. It may also become your prison. The old soul is not someone who is spiritually superior or mysteriously chosen. You may simply be someone whose inner life has become too developed to remain permanently contained inside a narrow social role. You detect contradiction quickly. You sense when words and intentions do not match. You feel the strain of pretending long before others acknowledge that anything is wrong. This sensitivity can make the collapse of the persona feel especially disorienting. The mask did not only hide you from others, it organized your life. It told you what to pursue, how to behave, what to tolerate, and what kind of person you were allowed to become. When it loosens, the world can feel strangely empty. A woman sits at the edge of her bed with her phone in her hand. A message from an old friend glows on the screen, asking why she has become distant. She types 3 explanations, deletes each one, and finally places the phone face down beside her. She is not trying to punish anyone. She simply cannot find language that would make her transformation understandable without reducing it. This is the beginning of individuation. Jung used individuation to describe the lifelong movement towards psychological wholeness. It is not self-improvement. It is not the construction of a better personality. It is the gradual separation of your real inner life from the roles, projections, and expectations that have defined you. The persona begins to lose its authority because something deeper is demanding recognition. If this remains unconscious, you may mistake the process for depression, failure, resentment, or social inadequacy. You may attack yourself for no longer being able to sustain what once seemed easy. You may become desperate to recover your former energy, without realizing that your former energy was often generated by anxiety, approval seeking, or the fear of disappointing others. The danger is not that the persona is weakening. The danger is that you will rebuild it before discovering who was living underneath it. You begin to notice how much of your personality was actually a response. What you called kindness may have contained a fear of conflict. What you called independence may have hidden an inability to trust. What you called loyalty may have been the refusal to admit that a relationship had already ended psychologically. What you called humility may have been terror of being fully seen. This realization can feel cruel because it complicates the story you have told about yourself. Jung insisted that consciousness begins when you are willing to confront what your preferred identity excludes. The persona presents the acceptable version of you. The shadow carries what the persona had to reject. If your persona is endlessly patient, your shadow may contain anger. If your persona is strong, your shadow may contain dependency. If your persona is spiritual, your shadow may contain ambition, jealousy, desire, and grief. A man is known by everyone around him as the calm one. During a family argument, he listens, nods, and says that everything is fine. Later, alone in the kitchen, he grips the edge of the counter until his knuckles pale. He has spent so long being peaceful that he no longer knows how to recognize the anger protecting his boundaries. What you have called maturity may sometimes be the sophisticated suppression of what you were never permitted to express. When the persona falls away, your hidden reactions become louder. You may feel anger that seems disproportionate. You may become irritated by people you once tolerated easily. You may feel envy toward those who speak directly or live without apologizing for their needs. These reactions do not mean you are becoming worse. They mean the emotional material excluded from your identity is demanding a place in your conscious life. You begin to notice that your exhaustion is selective. You are not tired of everything. You are tired of particular forms of participation. You are tired after conversations in which you monitor every word. You are tired after explaining choices that do not require permission. You are tired after comforting people who never ask what the relationship costs you. You are tired after shrinking your perception so others do not feel exposed by what you can see. The body often recognizes the false role before the conscious mind does. Jung viewed psychic energy as something that moves according to meaning. When a role no longer serves development, the psyche may withdraw energy from it. Motivation disappears. Enthusiasm fades. Tasks that once gave you identity become heavy. You may call this laziness because you have been trained to measure health by productivity. A woman arrives early to a meeting, opens her notebook, and writes the date at the top of the page. For years, she has been the most prepared person in the room. As the others begin speaking, she notices that she no longer cares about proving that she belongs there. She closes the notebook quietly and spends the rest of the meeting watching how often everyone speaks without saying what they mean. What you are calling loss of drive may be the psyche refusing to keep financing a life that requires your disappearance. This withdrawal of energy can frighten you. The old persona may have been built around competence, service, achievement, or emotional availability. When you can no longer perform these qualities automatically, you may feel useless. You may believe you have lost your value. But value and function are not the same. The persona teaches you that you are valuable because of what you provide. Individuation forces you to ask whether you can exist without constantly proving your usefulness. This is difficult for an old soul because you may have developed insight early. Perhaps you became the listener in your family. Perhaps you understood emotional dynamics that the adults around you refused to acknowledge. Perhaps people relied on your steadiness before you had developed a self separate from their needs. Your maturity may have been rewarded, but it may also have been demanded. Now you notice the resentment beneath your helpfulness. You notice how often people approach you only when they need regulation, advice, reassurance, or forgiveness. You notice that some relationships depend on your willingness to remain endlessly understanding. The moment you ask for reciprocity, the relationship becomes tense. Jung recognized that the persona is reinforced collectively. Other people participate in maintaining it because your role helps stabilize their world. The family needs the responsible one. The friendship group needs the peacemaker. The workplace needs the person who never refuses. The relationship needs the partner who understands everything and asks for very little. A man receives a call from his brother late at night. He listens to the same crisis he has listened to many times before. His mouth forms the familiar words of reassurance, but this time he stops halfway through the sentence. He says he is tired and needs to sleep. The silence on the other end tells him how much of the relationship depended on his endless availability. What feels like selfishness may be the first honest measurement of what your generosity has been costing you. When you stop performing the role, people may accuse you of changing. They are correct. They may say you have become cold, distant, difficult, or self-absorbed. They may remind you of who you used to be. What they often mean is that your former identity was easier for them to access. This does not make them evil. Most people relate to the part of you they know. When that part changes, they experience uncertainty. But their discomfort cannot determine the boundaries of your becoming. The old soul notices how quickly affection can turn into pressure when the mask is removed. You begin to notice that silence reveals more than explanation. Earlier in life, you may have tried to make everyone understand you. You explained your intentions, your wounds, your choices, and your reasons. You believed that if you found the perfect words, misunderstanding would disappear. Now you see that some misunderstanding is not caused by insufficient explanation. Some people misunderstand you because understanding would require them to question the role they assigned to you. Jung wrote about projection as the unconscious placement of inner material onto another person. Others do not always respond to who you are. They respond to what you represent within their psychological world. You may represent safety, rebellion, wisdom, weakness, temptation, authority, or rescue. When you change, their projection loses its object. A woman sits across from a friend in a quiet cafe. The friend says, with visible frustration, that she no longer knows who the woman is. The woman feels the old impulse to explain everything, to repair the discomfort, to return to the familiar shape. Instead, she takes a slow drink of water and says, "I am still learning that too." What you are calling distance may be the end of your compulsion to manage every image of you that exists in another person's mind. This silence is not emptiness. It is the space in which a less rehearsed self can emerge. You begin to notice that your preferences were not always your own. Perhaps you built your life around ideals you inherited. You pursued success because it promised safety. You pursued recognition because invisibility once felt unbearable. You pursued relationships with people who needed you because being needed seemed more secure than being loved. When the persona weakens, desire becomes confusing. You may no longer know what you want to do, who you want to be with, or where you want to live. The old answers feel false, but the new answers have not yet formed. This is one of the most psychologically demanding phases of individuation, because you are between identities. Jung compared such periods to a descent into the unconscious. The conscious personality loses its familiar map. Symbols, dreams, memories, and unexpected emotions rise with unusual force. You may become drawn to solitude, old books, forgotten creative impulses, childhood places, or questions that have no immediate practical use. A man stands in a shop holding a set of drawing pencils. He has not drawn since he was 14. He looks at the price, tells himself the purchase is unnecessary, and returns them to the shelf. Before leaving, he turns back, picks them up again, and carries them to the counter without knowing what he intends to make. What you are calling confusion may be the return of desires that were exiled because they did not support the identity you were expected to maintain. These returning desires are often quiet. They do not arrive with certainty. They may feel foolish, impractical, or strangely young. The persona prefers desires that can be explained publicly. The deeper self often communicates through attraction before it can provide justification. You may feel pulled toward less impressive forms of life. You may want fewer relationships, but more honesty. Less status, but more time. Less stimulation, but more depth. You may discover that the life you worked to build was designed to look meaningful rather than feel meaningful. This realization carries grief. You begin to notice how much of your past cannot follow you. The collapse of the persona is not only liberation, it is loss. You lose the future you imagined while wearing the mask. You lose relationships organized around an old version of you. You lose the certainty of knowing how to act. You may also lose admiration. Jung warned that individuation can lead a person away from collective values. This does not mean rejecting society or becoming isolated. It means that inner truth begins to outweigh automatic conformity. You become less willing to exchange psychological integrity for belonging. A woman sits in her car outside a celebration held in her honor. Through the window, she can see decorations with her name printed across them. She should feel proud. Instead, she feels grief, because the achievement being celebrated belongs to a life she no longer wants. She wipes her face, opens the door, and enters, because she has not yet learned how to disappoint the people who are proud of her. What you are calling ingratitude may be grief for the years you spent succeeding inside a story that was never fully yours. Old souls often carry this grief privately. You may understand why your family wanted certain things for you. You may see the fear beneath their expectations. You may recognize that they were trying to protect you according to their own limits. Your understanding, however, does not obligate you to continue the pattern. Compassion becomes destructive when it is used to justify self-betrayal. You begin to notice that authenticity is not always gentle. You may have imagined that becoming more authentic would make you peaceful, open, and endlessly compassionate. Sometimes it does. But first, authenticity often makes you inconvenient. You say no without constructing a legal defense. You stop laughing when you do not find something funny. You leave earlier. You speak more slowly. You allow pauses that others rush to fill. You stop rescuing conversations from discomfort. The persona was designed for adaptation. The emerging self is concerned with alignment. Jung did not describe wholeness as moral perfection. Wholeness requires the integration of opposites. Tenderness must learn to coexist with aggression. Compassion must coexist with judgment. Openness must coexist with privacy. Love must coexist with the capacity to leave. A man is asked to take on another responsibility at work. His manager smiles as if the answer has already been decided. The man feels his chest tighten, then notices the familiar urge to prove himself. He places both hands flat on the table and says he does not have the capacity. The manager's smile disappears, but the man's breathing becomes easier. What you are calling hardness may be the first appearance of a boundary strong enough to protect what is still forming inside you. This boundary will not always feel noble. It may feel clumsy. You may overcorrect. After years of giving too much, you may withdraw too quickly. After years of silence, your truth may arrive with more force than necessary. Integration does not demand that you perform transformation perfectly. It asks that you remain conscious of what is moving through you. You begin to notice that loneliness changes its meaning. When the persona was intact, loneliness may have meant being excluded. You feared losing connection because connection confirmed your identity. As the mask falls away, you may feel lonely even among people who love you. They know your history. They may not yet know your emerging interior life. This can create a form of loneliness that companionship does not immediately solve. Jung understood that individuation includes an encounter with fundamental aloneness. No one can enter the unconscious for you. No one can decide which inherited values remain true. No one can give you permission that will permanently replace your own inner authority. A woman sits at a dinner table while several people speak around her. She knows each voice, each gesture, each familiar joke. She smiles at the expected moments, then realizes that no one has noticed she has barely spoken. Later, while washing a glass alone in the kitchen, she feels more present than she did in the crowded room. What you are calling loneliness may be the psyche distinguishing between being accompanied and being known. The temptation here is to romanticize isolation. You may decide that no one understands you because you are deeper, older, or more aware than others. That belief protects you from vulnerability while disguising itself as insight. The old soul must be especially careful with this. Depth can become another persona. You can build a new mask from spiritual language, solitude, sensitivity, and psychological knowledge. You can become attached to being the one who sees what others cannot. You can use Jungian concepts to explain everyone around you while avoiding the humiliation of being ordinary, needy, mistaken, or emotionally exposed. This is the shadow beneath the spiritual identity. You may not only fear being misunderstood, you may fear being truly seen without the protection of being exceptional. The persona of the old soul can be subtler than the persona of the achiever or caretaker. It tells you that you are different from those around you. It turns alienation into evidence of superiority. It makes suffering feel meaningful, because it confirms that you are too complex for ordinary life. Jung repeatedly warned against inflation, the condition in which the ego identifies with something larger than itself. Spiritual insight, archetypal experience, and psychological depth can all inflate the ego if they are used to create a grand identity. You may believe the mask is falling away while secretly replacing it with a more sophisticated one. A man stops attending social events because he says the conversations are too superficial. At home, he reads about consciousness and underlines passages about solitude. Weeks pass, and he notices that he has not risked telling anyone what he actually feels. His withdrawal protects him from shallow contact, but it also protects him from the possibility of rejection. What you are calling discernment may sometimes be fear, wearing the language of depth. This is the uncomfortable truth you may still be avoiding. The persona did not survive for so long only because others demanded it. You received something from it. The agreeable persona protected you from conflict. The competent persona protected you from shame. The spiritual persona protected you from ordinary anger. The wounded persona protected you from responsibility. The independent persona protected you from needing anyone who might disappoint you. If the mask falls, you lose its protection. You may have to admit that some relationships were maintained not by love but by mutual avoidance. You may have to speak truths that change how others see you. You may have to become a beginner after being admired for your mastery. You may have to disappoint people who sacrificed for the version of you they believed in. You may have to grieve without turning grief into an identity. The cost of individuation is real because every authentic choice closes other possibilities. When you choose a life that fits, you abandon the lives built around adaptation. When you claim your voice, you lose the innocence of pretending you had no choice. When you set a boundary, you become responsible for the emptiness that follows. You cannot keep every relationship and become every version of yourself. You cannot remain entirely familiar to others while becoming unfamiliar to yourself. There will be moments when the old persona calls you back. It will remind you how easy it once felt to know what was expected. It will offer you belonging in exchange for your silence. It will tell you that your discomfort proves you are making a mistake. The persona is persuasive because it knows your oldest fear. It knows whether you fear abandonment, humiliation, chaos, failure, or insignificance. It will use that fear to convince you that the mask was your face. This is the choice before you. You can return to the role and recover temporary certainty. You can become useful, understandable, admired, or needed again. You can smooth the tension and resume the emotional labor that kept everything stable. Or you can remain inside the unfinished space. You can allow others to misunderstand you, while your deeper motives become clear. You can tolerate the absence of applause. You can let desire develop without forcing it into a plan. You can accept that some people will experience your honesty as loss. There is no way to choose this without consequence. That is why the falling away feels so serious. You are not merely changing habits. You are withdrawing belief from an identity that once organized your entire world. You are allowed to stop resurrecting a self whose time has ended. You are allowed to stop proving that you are still kind by remaining endlessly accessible. You are allowed to stop proving that you are wise by understanding every person who harms you. You are allowed to stop proving that you are strong by carrying what should have been shared. You do not need to destroy the persona. You need to place it in its proper position. The mask can still help you move through the world. You can remain professional, courteous, social, and responsible. But these roles no longer need to define the limits of your inner life. You can wear them consciously, rather than live inside them unconsciously. Jung's vision of individuation was never the elimination of personality. It was the development of a relationship between the ego and the larger psyche. The conscious self learns that it is not the whole of you. It becomes capable of listening to dreams, emotions, bodily reactions, symbols, and contradictions without immediately forcing them into the old identity. This listening changes you quietly. You may speak less because your words are no longer used to secure approval. You may move more slowly because urgency no longer makes you feel important. You may choose relationships in which you are not required to be the healer, the teacher, the strong one, or the mystery. You may become more ordinary. This ordinariness can be sacred. You no longer need every experience to prove that you are an old soul. You no longer need suffering to confirm your depth. You no longer need isolation to protect your uniqueness. You can be misunderstood without becoming superior. You can need others without surrendering yourself. You can participate in ordinary life without abandoning your inner world. The persona began as a way to survive the gaze of others. Its falling away invites you to live from a center that does not depend entirely on that gaze. What first appeared to be impatience may become discernment. What appeared to be withdrawal may become honest solitude. What appeared to be emptiness may become unclaimed inner space. You are not losing the person you were meant to be. You are losing the person you had to become before you were strong enough to question the role. The old soul notices the mask falling because the old soul has finally become tired of mistaking recognition for truth. What remains may feel uncertain, quiet, and unfinished, but it is closer to life than the polished identity you are leaving behind. If this resonates, subscribe to The Waking Shadow, where you explore Jung's psychology and the path of individuation. Watch the video on your screen now to understand what happens when your inner world no longer accepts the life your persona created.